It's a great pleasure to welcome you all here at the Center for Cyber Law and Policy at the University of Haifa. Those of you who came from around the country, those of you who came from abroad and will make their way back to the airport right after we finish the day. This conference is actually the second day of a joint venture, a conference that we co-organized with Hebrew University, with the cyber law program at Hebrew University. This is a good time to thank Tamar Birnbaum and Yovel Shani for co-organizing this conference. I heard that you had a great day yesterday, and I hope for those of you who are joining us today that would be a continuation. There are three partners. The second partner is the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, very complicated name, that stands for our partners at the Israeli government, and Nizan will describe this program that is supporting cyber security research and cyber policy research in Israeli academic institutions. And we at CCLP are the third partners for this initiative, and our Center for Cyber Law and Policy actually relies on three pillars. One is technology, the second is policy, and the third is law. So in technology, people are working on developing new technologies and researching not what is available, but what could become the new affordances of technology. But one of the underlying assumptions of our center is that this is not enough, and should, even though this is important for driving policy issues in this area, this is insufficient, and that policy related to technology should not only be driven by technological considerations and dominated by those who are experts in technology, and in the case of cyber security and security. And so we believe that policy choices should be informed by social science and the humanities, and this is part of the reason we try to bring events such as this in order to identify some of the issues and discuss them. The final pillar of our center is law, and here again, law is responding to technological challenges, but at the same time also needs to not only invent in law new innovative approaches to some of the challenges, but also to collaborate with those in the technological sector in order to imagine new types of secure the rule of law as we move to new areas such as AI, which is the topic of our conference today, and actually also at the rest of the week. So when we think about AI as an example, we should, and we want to address it by policy, we should probably think about at least three big questions from the perspective of policy related to regulation. So what is the subject of regulation? What are the values that are involved in such choices that we need to make and reflect in our policies? And whether regulation is necessary, and if so, how? And so talking about AI and trying to define what AI is of course tricky, right? This is, it's good as a title for a conference, but it's actually a very ambiguous and undefined term, not only in law, but also among our colleagues at the computer science department. And it actually covers a whole range of issues that we will discuss today, starting from technological efforts to imitate human cognition, right? To recreate artificial intelligence, automated intelligence. And at the other end, those efforts to apply and develop machine learning that is actually using existing data in order to make predictions regarding new data, unknown data. And there are, of course, different types of uses, and one of our tasks today would be to try and identify some of the social implications, not only of the different types of techniques that are used in AI within this range, but also the different types of implications that are related to the use cases, right? It would make a difference whether we use AI and to drive our car, to apply our content moderation in online discourse, to handle our finances, or to actually make some governmental judgments, such as replacing the judiciary or assisting the judiciary. One of the questions is whether you could assist the judiciary without replacing it. And in being involved in crime prediction and risk assessment, and in discourse management. When we come to identify some of the social implications related to AI, this is also a tricky task. And one of the reasons is that we try to identify or assess the costs and benefits involved in applying this technology. And these are not always clear, just because of the nature of the applications that we are using. But what is more concerning is that once we try to understand what the social and political implications of using a particular technology, it often turns out that we disagree on the meaning of all these values that we manage to map, right? And so we can be concerned about privacy and discrimination and bias and due process. But then when we look at the details, it turns out that we don't mean the same things when we talk about all these concepts. And one of the reasons we need this type of conversation that involve technologists, lawyers, and social scientists is not only to try and map some of the social values, but also to try and offer some more practical functional definitions where the systems themselves, though, that we aim at building, help us actually explore some of our definitions, make them more explicit, but also require us as a society to decide about them. Now, what does law have to do with that? In some cases, I would say nothing, right? Sometimes the role of the lawyers in the room would be to say, stay outside this regime, don't intervene. Because that would be the best thing to do. Sometimes it would be better to leave the social choices and the political choices to ethical deliberation, to companies to decide with their customers, to the market to create its own competition and social pressures. But sometimes when the stakes are high, such as in AI that is being used for weapons, or when AI is being used to as we've learned over the past year, to manage our democratic discourse, maybe regulation should actually step in. But regulation should also not only create a barrier and restrain the use of AI. When we discuss what it is to be done, we should probably also think about the way in which regulation, and here again, lawyers should think positively about this, could actually bring AI forward, right? How can regulation encourage innovation? How can regulation facilitate competition? How can we create a regulatory regime where these technologies that create so many benefits could actually be explored, and that how can we mitigate some of the legal risks that are involved in using these technologies? And again, here some of the solutions are legal, and this is a conference about AI, and so in law we see some solutions that are actually emerging, that are actually formed or shaped in the in terms of code, and so we see a lot of legal tech solutions to some of the legal or regulatory problems, more tools that become available to lawyers and regulators in order to make sure that the system does what it has to do and doesn't do what we fear that it could generate. So the purpose of our today's conversation is to bring together lawyers, computer scientists, data scientists, social scientists, to engage in a conversation that would inform policy, that would help us imagine new innovative design, and also help us reimagine some of the legal rules that we apply to this environment, and maybe to be more careful in the way that we design laws. Today's program is actually part of a whole week of research dialogue. Tomorrow, on Wednesday and Thursday, we will hold here an international research workshop for scholars that come from all over Europe. This is part of a collaboration with an organization called NOC, Network of Center, which is a global center of interdisciplinary research centers focusing on the implications of digital technology to society. Those of you who want to join us for tomorrow and Thursday as well, please register outside. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues at the Center for Cyber Law and Policy for putting this program together and for chairing some of the sessions and presenting their work. But I'd like to thank two people that are actually outside, unfortunately, but still deserve most of the thanks for putting this operation that was very complicated, especially the 3 days AI week in Haifa, and that is Lily Feiby-Shore, our project and event manager, and Yoni Har-Carmel, our executive director, for doing an excellent job in just bringing all of us together and allowing us to enjoy a great conversation. I look forward to the next day and the next 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you, Niva, for doing this 2 days. I think it's perfect and marvelous. I don't know how many of you were yesterday in Jerusalem, but I want to elaborate one point that Yovel said. After the talk of Ms. Krauss and Tehila, he said there is a difference between the techies guys and the AI or the law guys. The techies guys thinking how to build a better idea, better solution, a good solution for the customer. The law guys think how to build the right idea, the moral right, the ethical right of this solution. These two sides of the same thing is one of these points of this occurrence. But I think there is another one, the cyber side of this type. I can assure you, cyber AI will go wrong. Someone will use AI to do wrong, to do evil. Someone will hack the AI systems. I don't think we right now thinking together how to build our system, not in the good or the right meaning, but in do no evil meaning. How can we ensure that the evil thing by the evil guy or by the hacking won't happen in our system? To build a new system, a better system, but do not evil. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start with our first panel. So let me just ask our panelists to join us. Tal, will you introduce me?
יוני, תוכל לשים את הפרזנטציה שלנו?
אני אביא. רגע, בסיביליה אין כיסא. אלדר, אתה יכול להקפיץ לו כיסא? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first panel here in Haifa. We will be addressing an aspect we did not get into yesterday, which is the relation between artificial intelligence and various markets. And for that, we have an excellent panel. So quickly, so not to interrupt the flow of our forthcoming discussion, let us introduce them, as I say, meet our contestants. So first we have Michal Gal here from University of Haifa in our center. Michal is the former vice dean of our faculty, and she is a world-renowned expert on antitrust. She won recently several awards and has written important papers on interaction between algorithms and market dynamics. Thereafter, we have Professor Nizan Packin, a former graduate of our law school, currently at the Baruch College, Zicklin School of Business, where she teaches law. And her expertise is in the field of bankruptcy, corporate law. She spent extensive time at Skadden Arps, and she's been doing very interesting work on the interaction between big data and capital financial markets. And finally, we have Sivan-Sevilla, PhD candidate at the Hebrew University, working on regulatory matters. And he has a background both in computer and social science, and will be developing some ideas related to advertising markets. Ido recently offered a very interesting book with Gabi Siboni, right, who had an unbelievable lineup. And we have our Professor Jonatan Yovel, an expert in contract law and jurisprudence, who will be moderating. So I'm going to turn it over to Michal, and Jonatan will take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The subject that I'm going to talk about is a subject that, at least in my world, which is the competition world, has become one of the hottest subjects in the last 2 years. And I know that most of you are not competition law scholars, so what I'm going to try and do is relate to you some of the concepts and some of the issues that I think can be understandable by people beyond competition law. So the question is this. cartels are prohibited worldwide as illegal agreements. But we usually, when we think about cartels, we think about cartels among people. And then the question becomes, what happens once algorithms are introduced? Does something change? So there are at least two main questions that I would like to address briefly in this presentation. The first is, how do algorithms affect, if at all, coordination in markets? Okay? Can algorithms create, for example, a similar price among competitors? Do they make it easier? Do they make it more difficult? Does the digital world change any of the interactions, the dynamics among the different competitors once they use pricing algorithms? So this is the first question. The second question is, okay, assume that algorithms change something in the market. What are the legal implications? And specifically, when does such coordination amount to an illegal agreement in the legal sense? So this is what the paper does, and I'm going to try to be to present some of the ideas there. So I think that let's start with the first question about how algorithms affect coordination in markets. And maybe I should say something before that. I mean, do we want firms to coordinate their prices? The answer is generally no. I mean, because if you think about it, I mean, when firms compete, they would have an incentive to set better prices, better trade terms, increase the quality of the product. However, when they have the ability to coordinate among themselves, they would have an incentive often to create what we call supra-competitive prices. I don't want to go more into it, but this is one of the assumptions on which the paper is based. So in order to think about how algorithms might affect the incentives and the ability of firms to coordinate the prices among themselves, I think a useful way is to ask, what are the conditions that must exist for firms to coordinate, regardless of algorithms? Okay, let's start with the economics of coordination. And here I'm going to climb up a very high tree because I'm going to use the work of George Stigler, who won a Nobel for what I'm going to present now. And what George Stigler said is that in order to coordinate, firms need three conditions must exist. So first of all, firms need to reach an agreement among themselves on the trade conditions which are profitable to all parties. Okay, if they do not reach an agreement and each one thinks that that a different price, for example, would be better, okay, so no coordination will exist. Second one is detection. This is detection of deviations on the trade conditions which are profitable to all. And the reason that we need detection is because, think about it, if everybody agreed on a super competitive price, all you need in order to increase your sales is go a bit below, and many consumers might go and buy from you. And if you can do it secretly, okay, and nobody detects it, then what you do is you increase your own profits, but you internally break the coordination in the market. Okay? So the second thing Stigler said, we need to determine whether whether somebody deviated from the status quo. And if we found that somebody deviated from the status quo, then we need a way to sanction him or her, because otherwise he would have an incentive to deviate. Okay? What Stigler did not say, but it was obvious and others have added, is that in order for these conditions to exist, a fourth one must also exist, which is high entry barriers into the market. This means that if you set a high price, it's not easy for somebody who's not currently in your market to easily enter and then set a lower price and enjoy a large part of the market. Okay, so these are the conditions set by Stigler. Let's now add algorithms. So what are algorithms? very, very briefly, algorithms are structured decision-making processes that automate computational procedures to generate outcomes on the basis of data inputs. And there are many kinds of algorithms. I'm not going to delve into this because I assume that people who are sitting here know what algorithms are, but I think that one point which is important for this discussion is the difference between expert algorithms and learning algorithms. Because I think a good way to think about it is that expert algorithms are like a recipe in many ways. An expert determines the recipe, and that's for the decision, and that's how the algorithm would operate. Whereas learning algorithms, often, I mean, this is very, very general, but you can think about them a bit as like a cook. They decide what weight to give to each of the decision parameters. They don't have a set recipe from the beginning. Okay. So how do algorithms affect coordination? Let's go to agreement, okay? The first condition that Stigler put here. Algorithms can assist firms in the market by enabling a speedier calculation. They work very fast, and more sophisticated calculation when there are many parameters that have to be taken into account in order to determine the best price for all in the market. They also can generate a more rational decision because they're not affected by bias unless the coder inputs or the data reflect some kind of bias. They also create a known recipe. Even the learning ones, sometimes you can understand if you look at data which is which enters, you might not know the causality, but you might know the correlation. And if you know that, then all you have to do, and your competitors' algorithms are transparent, then what you have to do is look at their algorithms, know what their decision parameters are going to be, and simply react to that. Okay? You don't even need to play a game in the market. All you need to know is how they're going to make their decisions and act accordingly. Okay? And of course, algorithms can send, if they're transparent, they can send a very strong signal to your competitors. Detection is also made easier by algorithms, partly because they can monitor much easier the prices of your competitors. And it's not necessarily because they're algorithms, but because of how the digital market works. Just think about it. In the past, you wanted to know your competitors' prices. If you're a gas station, for example, you had to drive near the gas station and look at the signs. Or you were a bank, you needed to call them up or do something. Today, all you have to do is set the algorithm to look at their website. Okay? Much easier to do today, to monitor. And algorithms, because of their sophistication, can also better distinguish changes in your competitors' prices, which are based on real changes in market forces, and those who are real defections or detections from the status quo. Sanction is also made easier, because when an algorithm reacts immediately to a price change of a competitor, okay, within a millisecond, you see something on the website of your competitor, they change the price, you change it immediately. That limits the incentive of your competitor to lower the price in the first place. And also, because of their sophistication, they can better calculate a risk and so create a better credible threat, sometimes for a sanction. Once again, high entry barriers must exist. Algorithms do not affect entry barriers, so coordination among algorithms would be possible, once again, only if we have high entry barriers in the market. In many markets, we have high entry barriers, especially in a small economy like Israel, but also in large economies such as the US. Okay. And of course, other conditions must exist. When we're talking about homogeneous products, it's much better, much easier to coordinate, no strong brand recognition. I'm gonna leave these aside for now. Now, how does digitized collusion exist? We have a wonderful work by Ariel Ezrahi and Maurice Stuckey who have identified 4 cases for such digitized collusion. The first is what you might call traditional collusion. And here you even have some cases around the world. One of the most famous ones is called the Topkins case. This was a case that was brought both in the US and the EU. And what happened there were several sellers of online sellers of posters, and they competed. And then they decided that competition is not good because it reduces the revenue for all of them. So what they decided is to set similar prices for their online posters, okay? Cartel. So, but however, it was a very sophisticated calculation. So what they did is they all used the same algorithm and the same data in order to calculate the price. If you use the same input and the same decision mechanism, you get to the same price. And this is exactly what happened, okay? So it was found out by the US FTC. They were brought, and it was determined that this was an illegal agreement in the competition law sense. Okay, so this is what I call the easy case. A more difficult case is the hub and spoke. Okay, what happens here is that everybody in the market decides to use the same pricing algorithm. Okay, so instead of using your own or making your own calculation, what you do is you can go to an external firm. Everybody can go to the same external firm, for example. Okay, and that firm would offer pricing services, or you can all use the same one. Again, there were cases. There was a case in Luxembourg not long ago about such an algorithm used by travel agencies. They all use the same pricing algorithms, and it was decided, at least in some of these cases, that this is also illegal once you know that all your competitors are using this and you all agree, okay, to the same formula, okay, in the algorithm. So this is a more difficult case, but still relatively easy. The 2 more difficult ones are the last ones. So the first one is expert coding. Expert coding is a situation where the algorithm is determined by each and every firm, but each and every firm reacts to the known algorithm or the known decisions made by algorithms by its other competitors. So a very simple example would be one firm sets the price that is based on an algorithm which uses parameters that set a super competitive price which is good for all, and its competitor sees what the algorithm does, and what it does is it sets its own algorithm so that if the price is indeed super competitive, charge the same price as my competitor. If the price is not good for me, or if you detect a deviation, for example, then set a very low price, punish the firm, and then go back to the game. Okay? So there might be all kinds of strategies that we know about in game theory that can be played out through algorithms. The even more complicated scenario is one which involves machine learning. You simply tell your algorithm, increase my revenues or maximize my revenues. You don't tell him what to do. He learns by himself. He learns from the case studies. He learns from the reaction in the market. Okay, algorithms might be very sophisticated, okay, and reach coordination by themselves, and that has been proven to happen in many markets. Okay. So this is the first part of the paper, and the paper actually, I think, tries to make the case that algorithms matter, even with regard to illegal agreements and coordination. The second part of the paper then takes it to the legal realm, and it asks, okay, so what? Are there any legal implications? And what are the challenges that we have to think about with regard to algorithms once they're introduced and they are making the pricing decisions in the market? So the first challenge is whether, and let's talk mostly about the two last cases, okay? Whether the two last cases are actually rational reactions to the market conditions, or should they be considered collusive agreements? The second challenge is detection. Not only the cartelist or collusive firms have to detect deviation, we have to detect what's going on in the market. Okay, so we have a challenge with regard to the way that we can identify the reactions. Should we audit the algorithms of different firms? Should we audit the algorithms if we see the same price in the market? Okay, who should do that? Okay, all these are important questions. And the third challenge is, of course, enforcement. We found that they have coordinated their price. Okay, what is the remedy? Are we going to tell them not to use a certain algorithm? Are we going to change the algorithm for them? These are really, really complicated questions that many enforcers around the world are dealing with. Now, before we go to regulation, I always say that to my students, before we use law and regulation, before we use law and regulation, we should always ask ourselves whether we can rely on the market to provide solutions. Because if the market can solve it, we don't need regulation. It's even better without regulation. So a question to ask here before regulation is, will the market remedy this? So one way to think, and I'm not going to delve into this too much. Let me say a bit about this two latter ones. Secret deals. If it's possible for firms to make secret deals, then they have an incentives to deviate, as I told you before. However, if everything is online, if all the prices are online, if you can detect deviations, that would be more difficult. So it much depends on the structure and the behavior of the market. Another market solution is based on a paper that I wrote together with my friend Professor Niva Elkin-Koren, algorithmic consumers. If we're talking about algorithms used by suppliers, maybe consumers can use algorithms in order to counteract some of the effects of the algorithms used by suppliers. And we actually show that it provides a partial remedy, not a complete one, but there's something to think about there. But all these are partial remedies. So let's talk about more about legal solutions, policy and illegality. So one of the most important things here that we have to do in my realm is to clarify the boundaries of illegality. Because, and this is such an important endeavor because there's so many algorithms used out there. And the algorithms, even those used by suppliers, have many, many benefits to offer. They may offer many benefits to consumers and to social welfare. So prohibiting more than is efficient would be extremely problematic. We have to be very careful here. We have to understand the technology. We have to understand the implications, the economic implications, the social implications of everything that we do. So what I suggest in the paper is to tread very carefully, understanding the technology. However, there is one thing that we can already do. Okay, which builds on existing competition law, and this is the doctrine of facilitating practices. Okay, this is a doctrine which says that it's okay to coordinate. Okay, we usually do not prohibit coordination as such. However, we do prohibit coordination if there is something more, that there's an action that is avoidable, which is otherwise inefficient, that goes beyond simple coordination. So think about it. Let me give you a few examples here of what I have in mind. Great. Use the same data pool. Okay, you have much better data pools, but everybody decides to use this exact data, same data pool, and use the exact same algorithms, even though they're much better algorithms. Or make your algorithm more transparent, okay? If you make your algorithm more transparent to your competitors, but it doesn't benefit anything else, consumers, for example, that by itself would be or should be considered what I call facilitating conduct. Okay, I'm gonna stop here, but you know, there's a paper, you can find it on SSRN, and I'd love your comments.
Thank you, Michal, for this fascinating presentation. Always surprised how you managed to reinvent yourself. I think one of the fascinating aspects is that one of the things that Michal has been talking about or suggesting at least is consumer pushback through sort of algorithmic warfare, which clues directly into our next presentation. Without further ado, Professor Nizan, Geslevich, Packin, the floor is yours.
Let's see, did I have it here? Let's see that it's loading. Okay. Okay, so first of all, thanks for having me, and it's actually a very easy transition into my paper because Professor Gall's, one of her last points is actually very, very relevant to what I'm going to be talking about today, which is sort of focusing on consumer protection, and I focus on a phenomena that I refer to as the death of the second opinion. And let me just see that this is working. And so, obviously, everyone in this room already knows that we live in a society that is very codependent. Everything that we do today, especially in terms of consumer finance, which is what I'm focusing on, is very algorithmic based. The decisions we make literally every single day, which route to take when we try to get to a certain place, what flight to book, what to invest in, how to manage our financials better. Literally everything that we do is based on a certain algorithmic decision that sort of directs us to the best, most efficient, presumably, option for us. But I argue that this reliance on algorithms is concerning because of a combination of two things that once we put them together is sort of concerning. And the first one is we obviously, based on everything we know about algorithms, sort of figure, without even having any knowledge of economics, that it's pretty economically rational to passively outsource to technology. Big data algorithms in particular know better than us. They're faster, more efficient, they're cheaper, they're available. Why should we bother trying to make all these difficult choices when it's so much more efficient and economically rational to just passively outsource to technology? And we've been doing this in the last few years. So, even literally our, neurological, maps in our brains are different from not navigating as much or stopping all these different things that we used to do because we now just literally outsource to a technology tool, or in particular algorithms. And the second thing is our perception of big data algorithms as experts. And I argue that people perceive algorithms to be the ultimate authority. They think they know better, they're better than human experts, and presumably we should rely on them more than we do on human experts. And the reason these two, once you put them together, are concerning is because I argue that it sort of eliminates our need or our desire, human desire to get a second opinion, which is not something we do very often. So granted that these cases that we seek a second opinion in are somewhat limited. It's not in everything that we do that we seek for a second opinion. It's inefficient, it's time consuming, it's more effort, more money, but in certain situations that I argue, although limited, are very critical, especially when a lot is on the line, there's a lot at stake, big scale types of decisions or things we're just not comfortable with. In those types of situations that are unique but critical, we usually do want to get that second opinion, that if it will steer us to the right way that we feel more comfortable with, or might be actually better, we'll try to get that second opinion. And I argue that the combination of us outsourcing the technology plus thinking that the big data algorithms are better, they're more of an authority, we trust them more than human experts or any type of other experts, together would lead sort of to what I call the death of the second opinion, which is problematic. And I'll go over why in a few minutes. And so even though naturally we sort of associate the need to get a second opinion with the medical world, in the medical context, it's really not the case at all. When you shop for a mortgage, you'd want to get a better price or a better option. When you figure out how to invest your money, when you're trying to figure out how to get quickly to the train station because the train is about to leave and you don't want to need to rebook and pay and get rebook your train ticket and get there late. All these different second opinions that might make your decision be different are critical. And so there are a lot of situations in which we do need that second opinion, not in the medical route, but in the consumer finance route, as well as other fields of life, that it is a critical thing. And I also work and literature that the need to get a second opinion is linked to things like critical thinking, adaptability, creativity, innovation. And so we do want to maintain these human traits, and we do want to keep all those good things happening. And so what I argue is that currently with this sort of like two things put in place together, are desire to outsource the technology plus thinking they're better, society is sort of nudging us to kind of tone down these good traits that I just mentioned, and also introduces other challenges that I'll talk about as we rely more and more on algorithmic decision-making processes and systems. And so why do I actually think that people view algorithms as better, as more efficient experts, as a higher authority? And so it's interesting, and I should probably start with a series of studies that came out from Wharton, the Wharton School of Business in the last few years, sort of arguing differently. They're saying in certain circumstances, we actually witnessed algorithmic aversion, in which people say, oh, actually don't really fully trust algorithms. I kind of don't exactly want to do what they're saying. But I argue that in the consumer finance field, even though there are these studies that show that in certain situations there is some type of an algorithmic aversion, people are most likely to automate their activities and to view algorithms as superior experts. And I should probably say a few words about these studies. So the bottom line, what they showed is that even though people are sort of people are getting introduced to evidence showing that the algorithms are better, they might not want to adopt them fully, and they try to figure out where is sort of like the differentiating line as to when you would want to adopt the algorithms or not. And they realized that most people would adopt the algorithmic recommendation if they have some room for leverage, if they could tweak it up to like 5%. So let's say the algorithm tells you 1,000 is the good number you need to go with. People will be like, most people will be like, I want to have some input. I'll go with 950. So it's not like they're not following the algorithms. It's not like there is an actual algorithmic aversion, but they just want to feel like maybe they do have a little bit of control, a little bit of room to wiggle, so they're actually keeping their free will and doing what they want. And so that's sort of like the study, the algorithmic aversion. And so I wanted to look into how we actually measure up when we compare the algorithms versus the human expert. And so I ran this Amazon Mechanical Turk experience, which I'll tell you about in a second, to see if that is the case, if what I'm arguing is correct, because I've seen all these different studies in social studies and in psychology that say that people do feel like algorithms are scientifically objective, truth-delivering mechanisms, and they sort of think that whatever the algorithm spits out is as correct as 2 + 2 = 4, and that this is almost like a scientifically proven truth. And given that everyone in the room knows how in reality algorithms are, they're not objectively neutral, they're not science, they're not objective truths. I kind of wanted to see how did they measure up in studies in terms of this like halo effect of experts, and almost like following up on literature such as the fixation of belief. Why do we think they're like deserving this halo effect of qualified experts? And so what I did is I ran a series of questions and presented them to a group of 800 people, survey takers on Amazon Mechanical Turks, which is a tool that Amazon offers to run survey studies and kind of see what people answer and where they stand in terms of results. And so I broke the 800 people into 4 groups, and I had each 200 people group answer a slightly modified list of questions, and tried to see, and obviously you have to pay them, so it was a short survey, it was like 2 to 3 minutes, and each person that completed it got 75 cents. And I should say in advance, because I've presented this to a European audience that was like, this is impossible, and I want to put this out there, this was an American, only limited to America, so it might be different, I don't know, I haven't done a similar thing in a European subgroup, so it would be interesting to see if it would be different. But I do want to emphasize, in terms of gender, in terms of age, it was very broadly represented. So I had people from like 20 to 70, anyone that pretty much wants to make money while clicking on results, the questions. So, and in terms of subgroups, there was no difference between different genders, races, or age, which is interesting. And so I presented to the people a list of questions, and the first one was trying to compare their feelings towards the algorithmic expert versus the human expert. And the first one was, you decide to invest 15% of your savings in the stock market. You find a reputable stockbroker who makes investments recommendations. The second one was you decide to invest 60% of your savings. You find a reputable stockbroker, so like a higher. And I know that there's it's very easy to have people gamble on money they don't have. There are all these biases, and obviously it's not really working in the real world, but I kind of wanted to see if there was a difference after all. The third option, the third subgroup got the same question, 15%, with a reputable online automated investment advisor, so the algorithm. And the fourth group got the 60%, again, the higher stake, with the reputable online, so again, the algorithm. And then I asked them, how confident are you that you got the best recommendation? And they answered. And then I said the recommendation regarding the investment did not turn out as successful as you'd hoped, going down 30% in value. How likely are you to use the same service again? Trying to see if they forgive the person as much as the algorithm, or the other way around, sort of what they think about this. And the results were quite surprising. So in terms of comparing initially between the algorithm and the human expert, people trusted the algorithm significantly more. So that wasn't a huge shock. We know that there's some type of to me it wasn't. I was really hoping it's not going to turn out differently and crash my hopes, but there was a significant difference. People trusted algorithms more. And then I wanted to see the follow-up. I wanted to see how much more do they forgive and I was hoping they would forgive the algorithm more than the human expert, and I was actually right. So people did forgive and continue to significantly trust and feel comfortable trusting again, even though they knew the algorithm made a mistake, supposedly the bigger expert. They still trusted the algorithm more than the human, even after realizing it was a bad recommendation. And so, this death of the second opinion, I feel like it presents several challenges and several problems. And if I have to sort of summarize them into 6, they're the 6 following. The first one is, we all know this, there's so much has been written in the last few years that algorithms cannot produce neutral, objective truths. This is concerning, that the average consumer out there genuinely believes that the algorithms are giving them objective, scientifically proven results, and they don't know anything about what we've been discussing, right, in conferences like these in the last few years about biased programming and data selection and black box effect, and this is, in my mind, a problem. The second thing is not wanting to get that second opinion really hurts the sensation of free choice that we're really trying to maintain as a key element in our democracy. And there's enough about this out there, and how in deliberative democracies we want to keep this sense of the sensation of free choice, even if people, based on scholarship such as Donna Ariely's, don't like too many options. But we should have real options, and we should have the ability to feel that we can genuinely make decisions and have options to choose from. And number 3 is that giving up hope results in a lot of unpleasant, negative things in my mind. And 2 of the most obvious ones, there's less innovation and creativity. If you think that there's less hope, you're not going to try, because there's no point. So if Waze tells me you're going to get there in an hour and my train's leaving in 30 minutes, I'm not even going to try. I just, feel like it's hopeless. And it doesn't matter that there could be like a truck that was blocking and it got removed 2 minutes later and I could have actually been on time. I'm not going to try, right? And this is like a simple example that we could all witness on a daily basis. But obviously, you can scale this up to much bigger, more significant aspects in which you are not going to innovate or try or be as creative when you think there's no point. And number 4 is that there are still traits out there, believe it or not. I mean, it might not be the case in the future, and it might not be as extreme, but there are traits out there that AI can't easily replicate. And I think those are the same ones connected to the things that I mentioned in terms of getting that second opinion and wanting to create and innovate and think creatively and be adaptable and critically analyze and judge. And 5 is that I think there's a significant psychological and social value in wanting to get that second opinion, even if it's completely not economically rational. And it's because there's a value in going against the odds. There's a reason why people root for certain sports teams when they know like they're never going to win. This is something that was studied across the board. There was a series of studies that came out examining cultures in different parts of the world, and whether it was China or South America, people often rooted for the underdog. They wanted the underdog to win. They want to believe there's a chance. It relates to all the biases we know in psychology. This is also the American dream. Most of the Americans out there know that they're probably not going to end up dropping out of Harvard and becoming the next Mark Zuckerberg, but there's always that dream that you could be that person that makes it happen. And if we basically say everything is predetermined, predicted, it's hard to kind of live with that feeling. And last but not least, it is possible to get different surprising results. So it's a possibility. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's worth the chance. And so we have all these laws out there, and the GDPR is obviously a good example of trying to save us from this horrific, futuristic world that I just described. And so in particular, Article 22 talks about like how we would want companies using algorithms to give us the logic involved in the decision-making process, and also give people the right to have a human examiner review anytime they get a decision from an automated system, to kind of have this like ability to ask, hey, can I have a human like look at this and tell me if this makes sense, and that potential of intervention. But I argue that this is problematic because I don't really think that this human intervention promise is that realistic. And the reason is because of what I said before, mainly, right? That people view algorithms as a superior authority. So the human reviewers that are going to look into the algorithmic decisions, trying to kind of review them and judge them, they're biased with the same things that we are. Most people, feel the same way, right? That algorithms are an authority. And if they know they're right 99.9% of the time, are they really going to put that much effort into the 0.1% of the times in which they're reviewing this decision and it might be wrong? I would hope so, but I'm doubtful. Also, we've seen this happen in other areas of law. And so, for example, there's been a lot of writing about jurors that are exposed to inadmissible evidence, and the judges might give them instructions to ignore things they've heard and are inadmissible. But is it really possible for humans to kind of forget what they saw before and start fresh and look into something and be completely neutral? I'm not sure. And so even if they do think that they're changing it and presumably have this algorithmic aversion, we saw from the Wharton studies that when you change that 5%, you usually feel satisfied. I had control. I was able to tweak it or find a better, more satisfactory solution by, going down 5%. And so I sort of argue that we kind of need to create a certain, new policy having all these things in mind. And the first thing is we need to figure out a better way to actually do algorithmic auditing, sort of going back to what Professor Gal was saying. And we need to figure out a way that, and it's not easy because we heard about expert, algorithms and machine learning algorithms. And machine learning algorithms, it's not even that, doable in many cases to kind of actually really properly audit them and understand the logic and how that decision came into being. And maybe in that case, because of that, we need to sort of resort to new possibilities that are out there, such as using crowdsourcing algorithms. There's a wave now sort of pushing for that more, having like companies subject their algorithms to like outside external, auditing companies, or even going broader with some type of like a limited campaign in scope that they offer certain hackers in certain communities to kind of try and take a look at this and hack and see what they're doing with incentives such as like bug bounties, and maybe trying to like enable more transparency and actual objective auditing. And that's not something that companies would want to do today, mainly because once they do this, they open and expose themselves to lawsuits. So it's almost like what Facebook has been going through in the last few weeks. So after the New York Times expose came out, sort of saying they knew about the Russian involvement, and if that is the case, then they're exposed to all sorts of lawsuits, because if you knew about this and didn't do anything, and so why would companies want to do this if it's not legally requiring? Why would they want to expose themselves for afterwards having known or having external hackers or outside companies tell them that things are wrong? So unless it's like a mandated thing, probably not going to happen. The second thing is sort of designing via choice architecture methods to hyper nudge, and we can harness the power of big data algorithms in that sense, kind of hyper nudge the consumers that we know are most concerning, the people that would never seek a second opinion, the people that would never really try to shop. And there are a lot of people like that. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in the US, has released a study a couple of months ago. Astonishing numbers. Most people seeking for mortgages out there never went beyond the second page never got to the second page on their Google search trying to find mortgage rates. This is like, for most people, a once in a lifetime kind of a decision. Why would you not click next on your next Google page to see what's out there? I'm not talking about going physically to a second bank, but literally just looking for more. So we can harness the power of big data because we know consumers, and big data algorithms know to identify pretty much everything about us, to know who we need to hyper nudge more. And then we could even use some type of, all sorts of mechanisms, such as what Professor Gal was describing with the paper that you guys wrote together, on how we can direct them to other alternative algorithms and say, hey, keep in mind, even literally having like some type of a caveat popping up on your screen, just heads up, algorithms are not neutral, they're never objective, and you might want to look at some competing algorithms such as A, B, and C. Kind of give people more transparency and more options if we know that they're among those that would never otherwise. And just to kind of end on a funny note, I have this image here of Homer having some fruits offered to him in the front, and he's saying, oh, maybe if I put the fruits in the front, I can kind of choice architecture him into getting fruits rather than donuts. And obviously, there's more to that. And thank you very much. I am looking forward to comments and questions. And
it was fascinating, and I'm going to hold my intervention for after we complete the panel. Just I think the dialogue between you two is very interesting. There's one point that, as we go ahead, we should perhaps think about is that when are we actually talking about artists? Because we root for the underdog, but I'm not sure we're going to bet money on it. So not everything that we choose in life, although sometimes it mimics market behavior, falls very well within that market patterns. But we'll have time to discuss this later. Sivan-Sevilla,
yes.
thank you very much for your patience and the
Thank you.
yours.
Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm the last speaker before the break, so it's always challenging, but let's try to stay up. I can really relate to the previous lectures. I think my talk I hope will complement nicely what we've just discussed, because I'm going to dive into the case study of the online advertising ecosystem. Like you see, it's a jungle. It's a big jungle. That's why I find this case study interesting. And in my previous work, so I looked at 5 decades of U.S. federal policy to see how it constructs the relationship between national security and privacy. This was recently published in Policy and Internet. And I did another research about studying cybersecurity risk regulation models, and principles of it will be published in Hebrew and Haifa Law Review in the upcoming issue. And here I'm diving into a case study to really see how these things play out in the field rather than in the books. So did you know that every time that you open a website, in a process of less than 100 milliseconds, your website connects to an array of advertisers to choose the most suitable advertisement for your profile, for your personal behavior, as all the data brokers and advertisers collected on you. And this is happening behind the scene. I find this a classic case of the data governance crisis that we all fully aware of on the left-hand side, and the AI-based systems that are fed by this personal data on the right-hand side. And if you think about what intelligence is doing the right thing at the right time. And this is exactly what this AI-based system of behavioral advertising is doing, the right thing at the right time based on our personal data. And this is very much a work in progress. My goal is to show you the variance in the regulatory approaches that try to cope with this system, and talk a little bit about the implications of what does it mean for this industry and the monopoly power in this industry. So what's our research problem? So the literature tells us that regulatory oversight arrangements really struggle to keep pace with rapid scientific and technological innovation. This is nothing new here. They foster innovation and welfare, but at the same time jeopardize consumer protection and consumer power vis-a-vis corporations. And specifically, online advertisement relies on real-time bidding, the RTB protocol that serves as my case study for AI technology. Does not only allow a multi-billion-dollar industry to thrive, but also contains risk to our privacy and also to our security. So to feed this technology, like I just mentioned, the advertisers rely on our profiling in a non-transparent manner, right? Finding the right audience to the commercial products that we want, and we'll momentarily see how all this evolves once we click on a website that we like. In the past 2 years, regulators are trying to address that. It's a big challenge. So EU regulation, the GDPR in privacy, the upcoming e-privacy regulation are trying to address that. California, since June 18, is addressing that. This is a remarkable policy story that I will tell you a bit about that. And therefore, I ask how consumer privacy online is protected by these two regimes, why there are different ways to protect these regimes in the two polities, and what are the implications of that. So what's happening? Let's discuss about the field and the case study. So on the left-hand side, we have publishers. Think about news website, mobile apps, everything that sells or provide free content to us, but also provide a space for ad inventory. And these guys basically want to sell space. That's what they do. They want to sell their space and the website at the highest possible price. On the right-hand side, we have the advertisers. These are the players with the money in this ecosystem. It's very important to trace the money here. They are the players with the money. They want to buy space from the publisher and increase their return for their investment. In a world a few decades ago, these two would talk directly to each other with no intermediaries in between. A very simple world. But we have tons of publishers and tons of advertisers, and they want to connect each other on a real-time basis, and that's why we need all these intermediaries in the middle. We have us, the users. We are directly connecting to the publisher, providing it data. If it's a big player like Google and Facebook, we provide what we call user-generated content. So we voluntarily provide data. This is a very valuable data for these guys. We have supply-side platforms that work with all the websites and apps that you can think of. They sell the space at the highest risk possible for the advertiser. We have the demand-side platform. They optimize the return of investments for the advertiser. And on the right-hand corner, you can see the data brokers. So they are working basically in the dark, collecting information on us, doing offline profiling, and feeding the advertiser on what they know about us and what's the best suitable advertisement to sell to us. And we have a lot of instances of personal data among players like you see in this ecosystem. Publishers, they have data on us. The DSPs have personal data on us, advertisers and data brokers. While on the left-hand side, you see this is a first-party tracking. So we directly connect to the website, so we directly have data on us. On the right-hand side, we see a lot of third-party tracking. Let's discuss a little bit what this third-party tracking is. So the first time a website is visited, the data collector installs a cookie, a tracing cookie with a unique ID on our machine. And when the user visits another website of the same tracking company, our profile is starting to be built, right? They have a wide array of data instances of where what we clicked on, where we have visited, when did we do it, what's our interest, and step by step building a very accurate profile on what we're interested in. Just to know, an average website has 29 cookies, and 70% of them are third-party cookies. So every website you go, there are a lot of third parties that are tracking your behavior behind the scenes. The magic happens here in the RTB process, like a big stock exchange, supply and demand that we all know from the real world. This is an ad exchange process. So it works with a lot of SSPs, a lot of DSPs to find the exact match for the required advertisement that we all want. It's done via a cookie exchange that I will momentarily explain. The big players, Facebook and Google, they don't work in this simple, so to speak, ecosystem. They have many players within this value chain. They are the publisher, they are the SSP, and they have the ad exchange platform, meaning they have a lot of personal information on us, and they don't need so many intermediaries in between. This gives them a huge advantage in this ecosystem. How you make the ad exchange process efficient. So for publishers, the more you know about the user, the better you can target ads to charge the advertiser, right? They want to raise the price as much as possible. And for advertisers, the more you know about the user, you can better evaluate what your user is after. So personal information is a key to this industry to thrive and make money. And this is a very simplistic model. In fact, we have like n random number of SSPs and n random number of DSPs that all working as intermediaries in this chain. And this proliferation of intermediaries makes it even more challenging to try to inject transparency in these processes. Okay, now to better even explain that, and all is happening, of course, in the dark. Sorry, this was the punchline. All is happening in the dark, right? We as users only connect to our website. We have no idea about this complex ecosystem that I just spent a few minutes to explain you about. Okay, let's quickly go over 10-step process. How does it work? So I'm a user. I want to go to newyorktimes.com. The web page is downloaded to my computer, except for empty places with an ad tag saying, wait a minute, I'm looking for the best ad for you. Now, second, so this is the first step, working with cookie. Oh, that will be challenging, 5 minutes. Okay, I'll do my best. Okay, step 2, the cookie is passed to my SSP with the ad tag and the New York Times place. My cookie, my unique identification, my unique ID is passed to the RTB process, which talks to the DSP, and then the magic happens. The advertiser has his own unique IDs and cookies about me. The data broker has its own personal profile about me. They're all trying to sync together. They're all trying to sync together to see who are you and what are you interested about, and then they can place a bid. They place a link to the advertisement and amount of money, how much I'm willing to pay for that user in the process. This is happening to many DSPs at the same time, and a winning link is chosen. Step number 7, we have a winning link that goes all the way to my website, and then step number 9, 2 ad servers that give me the Coca-Cola ad at the end. This is all happening in 100 milliseconds. A lot of personal information is involved to make this optimized for everybody. Okay, so what type of personal data we have here? We have mine data. This is the third-party tracking that we all mentioned. So it's accumulated by the tracking technologies, mostly cookies, but not only cookies, by many players in the field. We have first-party tracking directly with the New York Times website, with the website that we're interested in, about what we click on and what the publisher knows about us. And we have voluntary data. This is the most valuable data in this ecosystem. This is me as a user telling to the platform who I am, what are my thoughts, and what I'm interested in. Okay, so what are the privacy risks? We talk a lot, what's the privacy issue here? So we see basically the collection, use, and making decisions based on personal information without the data subject knowledge or consent. You can call it profiling. And if it reminds you of Franz Kafka, The Trial, of course, you are not alone. Okay, so what regulators do? So the GDPR really made an impact on this industry. It basically addresses the lawfulness of processing and accountability in all this ecosystem that I've just described. Processing means the user has to provide active consent that he's willing or accepting the collection of this information. And accountability is happening through transparency, through telling who are the intermediaries that I'm working with in this process. Other principles like minimization, integrity are more operational once the legal basis is set. What the GDPR says about profiling? So basically, Article 21 Working Party qualifies that profiling for marketing purposes does have a significant effect. It does need the user consent if you target minority groups, if it involves differential pricing or denies certain opportunities, and this is not allowed. since January 2017, the EU is debating the e-privacy regulation. And I'm saying a regulation and not a directive because this is a law. Once it passes all the three parties negotiation, it becomes binding for all member states without the need of another implementation law within national authorities. So this is a very crucial debate for the companies that's happening there. It's basically on top of the GDPR saying, wait a minute, we need to dedicated special care to communications data, to what's happening in tracking communications, which means the data and metadata and the cookies, information that is stored on our devices, and extends regulation beyond web browsing to also include Facebook Messenger app, WhatsApp, Skype, voice over IP. So platforms that usually these regulations were not covering before. And one of the goals was to improving the harmonization of these tracking technologies after previous failures, with some exception to cookies that relate to analytics and security updates. And this is important. Liability is on the browser or the operating system. They are required to provide the mechanism for this to work. Okay, now we move to the United States. This is an interesting story. Anybody know who this guy is? We have some US audience here. I'm sure you know this guy, Alistair McTaggart, right? He is a real estate agent that grew up in the East Coast, studied at Harvard. What is he doing here? So he decided, actually he built housing projects for the same tech industry that he's now fighting with his bill. He's a father of 3 children, said he was concerned about surveillance and put a lot of money on it to put a bailout initiative in California. A bailout initiative is a very strong measure, a direct democracy measure to pass a law by the citizens, not by the government. And everybody was freaked out. And he said, if you're going to pass a privacy law, I'm going to withdraw my initiative. And this is what happened. Some say, unfortunately, this is what happened because it's very difficult to amend a bailout initiative. You need a 70% majority. You need another bailout initiative. It's not the regular politics that we all know about and the industry is controlling so well. Basically, he grants consumer the right to know about what is collected, the right to prevent businesses from selling their personal information, and they have some data security measures. It implements an opt-out rather than opt-in mechanisms, implemented again through the web browsers. And in response, a big surprise, now the industry in the United States is pushing for a preemptive federal privacy law. This is not happening for 32 years or something. This is now happening because this guy decided to put a few millions of dollars after a cocktail party with a Google engineer telling him that if people knew how much we collect about him, they would be freaked out. He decided to make action with this ballot initiative and this law, and this is what we see in California, and it's for us to see how it's going to diffuse. Okay, I'm gonna quickly wrap up to provide the comparative perspective of what we're doing here. So basically, the approaches are different. I want to highlight 2 things. In the EU, if personal information is regulated from any source, public or private, in the California, it's not from public sources. And in the EU, it's anyone who processes personal information. In California, it's only large businesses. So if you make $25 million or more, if you make most of your revenue from selling data, you're obligated. If not, you're not part of the regulation. So it's a very data brokers-oriented approach in the US rather than in the EU. So this was talking about consumer protection. Now let's talk about consumer empowerment. What power these regulations give to the consumers. So opt-in versus opt-out, private right to action in the EU versus private right to action only for data security in the US. We can definitely continue to discuss this in the Q&A because of the interest of time. Let's just talk about the implications and
Maybe in Q&A.
Just implications. I'm done. Final slide. So the implications basically, it makes the strong stronger, right? They control 60% of the market. They absorb 90% of this market growth, Google and Facebook, and they are better off after all these regulations, right? Users are more likely to prefer the big players. Small players provide only fewer incentives. Big players hold most actors in the value chain, right? They're likely to better respond to accountability and transparency requirements. They have more means to coerce consent from the data subject, right? I will provide my consent to Google rather than to a third party that I know nothing about who wants to collect information about me. And following these rules, the industry is likely to move from third to first party tracking, and this is where the big players have many advantages as well. So a lot of good intentions, but obviously the chosen regulatory path is not good news for us consumers. And I'm going to wrap up just by saying that the US approach is more commercial oriented. The EU is more focused on identity revealing aspects of the data, but we should also think about how this works on for big players as well. Thank you. That was fast.
Thank you very much, Hugo. I'm going to kick out the thing about 15 years ago. One of our favorite texts was an article by Avram Polakov called Artificial Idiocy. And I always think about the artificial idiocy when I go on Amazon, for instance, and it suggests that I purchased exactly what I purchased already last week, and this could have been, let's say, a dishwasher, it's something that the person purchases every so often, but that's just part of the thing. So maybe a set of quick introductory questions, and you may pick up on those or not, according to how you wish. I'll actually start with you, Nizan, and I have a couple of questions. First is, you seem to put a lot of value on autonomy and on agency, and I'd like to know what is the value of agency in the context that you discuss. For instance, if you tell me that it's going to be a good idea to diversify my sources of information when I consume whatever, my initial response was, great, where's the algorithm to do that? I mean, why do I need to do it? Why do I need to do this when I can ask? When I can outsource to an algorithm? And there are, of course, since Auction Spotter, like in prehistory, we do have algorithms that are meta-algorithms that help or don't help, but mediate our relation to other algorithmic platforms. So that's the first question. And I'm not sure it's a question that you can answer in any detail now, but I think your work would benefit from a source of a parsing out of the instances in which you find social and even moral value in agency and autonomy, and where you don't care much about it. For instance, you describe the relationship of sports fans to the civic relationship to sports teams, and this has a lot to do with identity, as you know, and with history, and with some of you may know this, some of you may not, but there are actually quite rigid rules as to which team you're allowed to pick up. I know this since when I remember being a student in the United States. It was not obvious that I could root for whatever team. I was supposed to root for the team where, the city where I am, or so that's the second question. When are we talking about genuine markets, and when are we bundling up market and quasi-market contexts and behaviors? I think in Michal's presentation, we're talking really about paradigmatic markets, and there the question sort of solved itself. But you're asking a sort of a bit of a different question, and it's interesting that the questions are not symmetrical. When they come from the supply side of Michal, because they come from paradigmatic market behavior, the question doesn't arise. When you're coming from the demand side, which is your side, not everything we do is within market context, of course, although some decision making simulates markets. I'm thinking about algorithms that matchmaking algorithms, right? It's not just what time are right? Which pet food my dog will consume, which actually my dog's collar determines according to my dog's needs. Doesn't go through me. They just the collar analyzes the blood and determines what to whether the dog needs vitamin supplements or not. But also in matchmaking, things that we think about as being things that we would like very much to keep to our own autonomy and agency. We use quasi-market methods, and I think that parsing is important. Second question is, you spoke about it, but maybe not, and that actually strengthens, I think, your thesis, and that's the bias towards defaults. We do have a strong psychological bias towards defaults, as you know. That's one of the reasons why we many times don't go for the second, the third, or the fourth opinion, because we just go, we assume that the first opinion is the default. And that's, of course, a mistake. The first opinion is the first opinion because they paid more in order to be the first opinion, but we consider the first opinion to be default, and we know that there's very strong psychological and behavioral findings about consumer behavior that leans heavily towards defaults, even when there is absolutely no cost involved, absolutely very, very minimal cost involved, to shifting for seriously advantageous alternatives. And I'm sure that you're familiar with some of the literature. Second question is third point. That also I think relates to the first and the second presentations, and that has to do with transparency. Now it's different, I think, because with you, Michal, I mean, the title of the presentation was Algorithms as Illegal Agreements, and I think I'm sort of shifting now a little bit. And I think one of the interesting things is that you've shown us actually that agreements became redundant because it's not agreements, it's pure behavior. Traditionally in analyzing cartels, we thought about cartels as agreements, and these agreements could have been, there's a problem enforcing them, and we have a model that shows that cartel agreements are inherently unstable because there's strong incentive for each of the parties to exit. And what you show us, and this is really very distressing, is how the cartel behavior has bypassed agreement. Because right now the reaction of the bots to the behavior of the other bots is direct. It doesn't have to go through negotiation or through anything else. Both of you have discussed, and I'm happy that it came up, but both of you have discussed transparency as a sort of an approach that to a degree is a competitor of law, right? It's not regulation, it's something else. Let people know what's going on, and then they can decide for themselves. Of course, me being me, I'll say let people know, and then they can find an algorithm that will help them decide for themselves. And I wonder if you would like to discuss a little bit more, because we know regulation. There's an interesting algorithmic asymmetry that Michal, I think, floated very, very powerfully in your presentation. I'm also interested in understanding why it keeps being this way, why there's still a very strong algorithmic asymmetry between the supply and the demand side. And I think one of the reasons that transparency now seems to us to be inadequate is that we wouldn't know what to do with it. Let's say that we have a rule now, we have a law, that Google has to tell us, or Waze has to tell us how it, and they have to open up the algorithms for us. How much time and energy and education and training are we going to put into actually understanding this? With Michal, I think it's even more difficult, because you really need a very high level of technical expertise in order to be able to understand how these algorithms work. And some of this will solve itself because we're like a desert generation, right? We weren't born into an algorithmic world, but our children will study algorithms in kindergarten. And some of the skills that you need in order to navigate in this world would, I mean, they'll have them, but it will be an ongoing competition all the time. So because there is, of course, the libertarian anti-regulatory approach says, let there be complete information, and don't tell anybody what to do. What can you do with this information? Who will mediate it? Who will translate it? Who will explain it? Of course, goes to the very cryptic mechanisms that Yovel described. So that determines so much of what we are exposed to as consumers. And the last thing is a question for Michal. You only spoke about price. And I wonder, do you have findings or other findings out there from the supply side that deal also with artificial availability, so creating, supply problems when we know that this works in the analog cartels. So does it work also in digital cartels? So availability, product characteristics, and other downsides of cartel behavior that don't rely necessarily to price. I'm really thinking mainly about artificial shortages, which create, that have a very, very interesting influence on demand. Whether that can be done through the mechanisms that you described. So maybe we'll just, by the order of inverse order, but the same order. Okay, let's go through the same order. We can begin with Michal. Just whatever you want to pick up on, you're very welcome to. Whatever you would like not to, and please briefly, because we do want to leave the room for the other questions.
Okay, so I'll be very brief. A few comments here. First of all, thank you, Jonatan. These were excellent observations. And what algorithms can do? Can they also only set price? Of course not. They're very sophisticated algorithms. Of course, it's easy. The case for price is the easiest one to make once we assume homogeneous markets. However, we can see algorithms, and there have been games played out among algorithms that go even beyond trade terms and go to market division. So, for example, I sell in this geographic market and you sell in that geographic market. So there might be many, many different, and of course what I said applies, but it requires a more sophisticated algorithm usually. Second point about transparency. Transparency, I think, is a very important point, but I would like to emphasize one difference here between, and I think it's a very substantive difference between the libertarian view that says, okay, give me complete information and let everybody decide. What I'm saying is exactly the opposite. What I'm saying is that sometimes, especially when you have algorithms, exposing your algorithms to your competitors that increase transparency can harm markets. So we actually want less transparency rather than more transparency here. So this is the second point, and of course we can debate that. With regard to skill sets, it's really interesting because the different competition authorities around the world are now talking more about talking more with data scientists. So and they are employing data scientists. And so this is a trend that we see in competition law as well, which I think would become stronger and stronger. And finally, I do believe that a lot of or at least some of the solutions to these problems, especially because our world becomes so complicated and so many options, some of them would be solved through algorithms, and that's the idea that Niva and I put forward in our algorithmic consumer paper, which is if you have too many choices, if you have too much information, if you don't have the decision power or even the wish to determine decisions, we might have algorithms making these decisions for us, for the consumer. And as long as we can rely on them to make the choices which are good for us, some of the problems in this very complicated world can be solved. And actually, this is what the big five are competing on right now. They are competing on creating the better Alexa, the better Siri, the better Google Now, whatever. And right now, they're only used as a conduit for our own decisions. But the idea is, and that's what these big firms are working on, we will tell them what we want and they will make the choices for us. This is the world I'm scared of, but this is a world we're on the verge of.
So I actually agree with all these points, and so I'm not going to repeat the exact same things, but I just want to say I'm also okay with algorithms that are genuinely offering genuine second opinions. So what I mean by that is not like supposedly having a competition when it's really not a real offering of more selections, but just more of the same. So for example, I presented this at Fordham Law School, and someone stood up and said, I never follow Waze blind. I always double check with Google Maps. But Google owns Waze, and the two algorithms are directly linked, and Google Maps thinks itself the way. So you're not really getting more. You're thinking you're getting more, and so this is really my problem, and I'm a strong believer of informed consent, and I realize that as products and services become more sophisticated, and certainly digital ones, it's harder to get real informed consent, but at least, breaking some of that asymmetry and that pretense of actual competition or actual, menu of selections when there is none, that is sort of more concerning to me. In that respect, I sort of go into the transparency route. And then in terms of, in terms of like the sports and rooting for the underdog, obviously, if you have a specific team in mind or like different, agenda that you're, sort of bonding with, it's a different story. But if you're, what I'm talking about is more like the genuine, like I'm watching a neutral David and Goliath, and I want David to win just because he's like the weaker, smaller. It makes me feel good. That's sort of the bias I'm going for, and I think it's critical even in financial and in corporate markets because we want to promote the disruption and this innovation process and creativity, and so. Interesting, data from TechCrunch, a website that's sort of like an organization that sort of like is an umbrella organization for startups, is that while the average successful startup business is based on its founders' previous 3 or 4 average failures, and that's the successful ones, right? It's not just that so this means that it's not just that you need to fail first multiple times, go against the odds, sort of be like, fail becomes to succeed, right? Beating the odds in that sense, but it's also that the TechCrunch data that shows that in terms of funding or investing, there's a much apparently data shows that there's a much higher chance of raising money or getting funding if you show that the founders are repeat players that have failed multiple times and have experience in the industry and kind of know what they're talking about. So even in terms of that, like if we don't enable that chance or kind of try and hope for people who don't have a lot of chances to succeed, we're not going to be able to promote any innovation or any sort of like second chance, even in the corporate world or in terms of like business activity. So I kind of think about that in that sense. And then just an interesting quick anecdote because I don't run out of time. So we want to leave more time for the Q&A. But you were talking about dating, and I'm the first to admit that in terms of efficiency, algorithms do it better, even with dating, right? So even like matchmaking. Algorithms are much more efficient in terms of successful rate in dating. So that's a totally personal, non-corporate or business field. But we don't want to get to that world where we, as Michal just described, that we have these big five and we don't really have a genuine, competition. And there's an episode in the show Black Mirror where like you are not even going to continue beyond 72 hours of dating this person because the predictions are such that it's never going to happen. So we're just literally following blindly these predictions, ending up in this world where we're not trying anything beyond what was predicted to us to be successful. That's a scary reality to me, and I think, despite not having it be always economically efficient or economically rational, we should push back against that.
Thank you. Very brief. So for me, the takeaway of our talks is very clear. I think market can take us that far, and we're at the point that they became too giant, and they were super instrumental in building the ecosystem that we all enjoy today. But we need a player that will play the public interest consistently. At the same time, when you look at the government's models that develop around technology, you see a much more horizontal approach to regulating technology. In the advertising industry, we have a trade association with 650 companies that develop standards that really moves this industry forward in terms of cybersecurity. They have their own GDPR consent and transparency accountability framework. So the industry is working with the regulators to make things better. And I think as we go along and try to understand how to advance public interest in technology, and I think our National Cyber Director had a few great examples of how to do this right. We see that the government is no longer a traditional top-down government, but very more horizontal, working with the industry, working with the companies to play the public interest, because the market will not do it obviously by itself.
Thank you. Please.
much for a lovely panel. When I heard you, Nizan, I was thinking of, just yesterday, I was trying to look for a flight to New York. And obviously, and I think most of the audience here, would look for at least 2 websites. But the problem is that somehow you know that Expedia bought so many websites, and you have this illusion as if you have so many options. It's a regulatory failure, of course, this kind of pseudo richness. So we do look for a second opinion, but it's so difficult to get the second opinion. Like when you want to get the second opinion with Waze, with the routes, you have to click so many buttons until you get all these options, just to realize that it recommends one option that is 1 minute faster, but 10 kilometers more. Like, you have to get some kind of media literacy, but in a new sense. And in that sense, I felt that Michal's presentation gave us some clues, I thought, maybe for this. And I was wondering what you were thinking about this pseudo competition that we have.
So I think, first of all, in terms of like sophisticated audience and consumers, obviously you're in the higher end, and I'm not sure that most people would look for a second website. They'll probably think, I heard Kayak or Skyscanner is a very efficient website, and they're probably only going to look for that. And if they're sophisticated, they're probably going to set up an alert that says, let me know when prices go down. But I don't necessarily think most people would do more than that. Even in terms of mortgages, what I showed you, the CFPB's website, what I mentioned before, people don't even bother clicking to the second page. Literally, like, you're buying a mortgage, it's just like a once-in-a-lifetime decision. You're not even clicking next. And so this is, a little bit concerning. And I think you're exactly right about what you said in terms of not really getting more options. And just last week, there was this, breaking news story that came out about one of the biggest UK airlines that was supposedly, always showing up as the cheapest. And it turns out that every single time, and they're regulated with the one who actually defined this out, every single time people were clicking on, booking those flights, if the website recognized that multiple passengers had the same last name, it said, oh, unfortunately, we don't have seats, for you guys to sit next to each other. You'll have to add 15 pounds. And this was obviously the algorithm was biased as well. And no one knew for the longest time, right? So supposedly it was the cheapest. They came out, as the cheapest, but it ended up being more expensive. And it took a long time for it to be discovered. So I think you're exactly right. This is where we need to kind of focus on figuring out how there's actual competition. People know to look for something else, or to know that there might be more to that.
Thanks. I think you have the title there for a new paper, The Illusion of Choice. Great title, by the way.
Decision fatigue more.
Yeah, but you're very right that in the online world, there are many options that are not real options. They dress up as options, but they are not real ones. Again, I want to go to what I said before. Maybe we need an algorithm to do that for us, because we have decision fatigue. We won't go to the second page, even if this is our mortgage, one of the biggest decisions we're going to make. So why not have an algorithm do that for us and really look at look at the contract and read the contract. Actually, the algorithm can do that, and we're actually going to have in a few weeks. Professor Miklitz, who is going to talk about exactly algorithms who can then read contracts and tell you how fair they are. Okay, so all of these are things that are already out there. I just want to finish with an example because I think it's indicative of where we can go with the technology, and it's an example which is called Flipper. When I presented our paper in Britain, they gave me this example. This is an algorithm, very simple algorithm, which every day wakes up in the morning and it looks at your choices of gas supply in the area, and every morning it determines whether you have the best deal or there's another better deal for you out there. It costs 25 pounds, and if it does not save you more than 25 pounds, you get all the money back at the end of the year. It saves you much more. So this is an algorithm which makes the choices for you. So we're now talking about choices that people make, but do we necessarily need to make all the choices? And again, we're going to think, it doesn't mean that I want all the choices to be made by an algorithm, but especially dog food or gas prices or whatever, why not have an algorithm do that for us and leave our energy or decisional energy for the more important things in life?
The point is now that it's not just how much does it cost to go to New York, but the algorithm determines for you where to go, right? Because you punch in a sum and you say, where can I go for 500 quid? And so, anybody? Yeah.
I know that we're out of time, but just a quick question. I think that what comes out of your three presentations is that we need to deal with power, actually, so that we don't really have a market. We talk about market, but we really don't have a market because there is no supply and demand, and there are no market pressures that come from the demand side, either because people are uninterested, because they're overwhelmed with information, because they cannot handle information. By the way, the financial sector is not a good example because we always needed someone, right? And a person that advises you in the bank is also a black box. So you rather go to an algorithm. I mean, an algorithm is as a black box as a person, right? But I think that it's true that we cannot handle this, but and that making, as you showed in your presentation, making choice more important and requiring consent is meaningless. It's actually making the big five even stronger. So the question is whether the solution is in creating competition by regulation, right? It's like just regulating the big five. This is a market that has to be regulated in order to create these dynamics, and not necessarily by praying for some pressure that would come from consumers, by simply, redesigning the market by telling the big fives what they can and cannot do.
I think we'll leave this proposal up for grabs. Thank you, Niva. As you said, we're out of time. Thank you very, very much for these fascinating presentations.